President Woodrow Wilson made an interesting statement. I quote, "There is a power so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive that prudent men better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it." End of quote. He was referring to the money powers that controlled him completely, the Illuminati. Winston Churchill made a statement, I quote, "From the days of Spartacus or Adam Weishaupt, who founded the Illuminati May 1st, 1776, to those of Karl Marx, to those of Trotsky, this worldwide conspiracy for the overthrow of civilization and for the reconstruction of society on the basis of arrested development." That means go backwards. That's why they're de-educating our children. And they graduate without even being able to fill out an application for employment in many cases. He went on to say, it played a definitely recognizable role in the tragedy of the French Revolution. It has been the mainspring of every subversive movement during the 19th century, has gripped the Russian people by the hair of their heads, and has become practically the undisputed master of that enormous empire. End of quote. They were setting up a seen enemy of the Western world of Christianity. Now, Mr. H. Rowan Gaither, chairman of the Ford Foundation, which also funds international movements for world government, made this statement as he was interviewed by a Senate subcommittee on un-American activities. Quote, "All of us here at the policy-making level have had experience in either the OSS or the European Economic Administration, and our directives are that we use our grant-making power to so alter life in the United States that we can be comfortably merged with the Soviet Union." End of quote. Mr. Norman Dodd happened to be the person that this was given to personally. There was a German philosopher by the name of Hegel, Hegel. He lived from 1770 to 1831. What I'm about to say is very important if you want to understand why President Bush absolutely insisted that there would be war with Iraq. There was no way out. I don't care if Saddam Hussein would have taken his troops out of Kuwait. He would have come up with another reason. There had to be war in the Middle East. Here's why. And as we go through the rest of the program, you'll understand it, and it'll become clear. Hegel developed the theory of what is called the thesis versus the antithesis, and out of that would come the synthesis. What this means is that you create an idea. This is the thesis. It collides or is in opposition to the antithesis. They're two opposite ideologies. And when you cause a collision between them, out of it becomes the synthesis. All this really means is crisis management. You create a crisis, furnish the solution, and then you bring the nations of the world where you want them. Now, when the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait took place, didn't we see such people as Alexander Haig, member of the Council on Foreign Relations, the modern manifestation of the Illuminati? Henry Kissinger, who at one time was the #1 man in this country during the turbulent 70s after the Nixon resignation, and Mr. George Bush, and also a Soviet representative to the United Nations, state that a new world order was emerging because of cooperation in this international crisis. I think if most of us were listening, we heard it. Who is building this new world order? Remember, President Roosevelt wrote in 1933 that a financial elite had owned the United States since the days of Andrew Jackson. On February 23rd, 1954, Senator William Jenner warned in a speech, and I quote, "Today the path to total dictatorship in the United States can be laid by strictly legal means. Unseen and unheard by the Congress, the President, or the people, outwardly we have a constitutional government. We have operating within our government and political system another body representing another form of government, a bureaucratic elite which believes our Constitution is outmoded and is sure that it is on the winning side. So these bureaucrats that run our government in the State Department, back during the McCarthy era, he found 81 that he could identify as a communist. And then Scott McLeod, later on, head of the State Department Security, found 839 communists in our State Department. One government department alone. I'll continue this quote. All the strange developments in foreign policy agreements may be traced to this group, who are going to make us over to suit their pleasure. This political action group has its own local political support organizations, its own pressure groups, its own vested interests, its foothold within the government, and its own propaganda apparatus." End of quote. That was found in Phoebe Courtney's booklet, America's Unelected Rulers, the Council on Foreign Relations, which is the modern manifestation of the Illuminati in the United States. There is a word that frequently comes up. It even comes up on the news media on occasions. It's called the establishment. There's a group in the United States that is termed the establishment. It even appears now in the American Heritage Dictionary. Here's what it says, quote, "An exclusive group of powerful people who rule a government or society by means of private agreements and decisions." End of quote. Columnist Edith Kermit Roosevelt, who was the granddaughter of President Theodore Roosevelt, described the establishment in an article she wrote for the Indianapolis News on December 23rd, 1961. I will quote her. She says, "Most people are unaware of the existence of this legitimate mafia. Yet the power of the establishment makes itself felt from the professor who seeks a foundation grant to the candidate for a cabinet post or State Department job. It affects the nation's policies in almost every area." End of quote. Membership in an organization called the Council on Foreign Relations has been absolutely necessary since World War II if anyone was to advance in a government job in the United States. The Council on Foreign Relations was established in 1921. Since that time, notice a few interesting things about that organization. What are its purposes? And also, why has most people never heard of the Council on Foreign Relations? And as far as I'm aware, the name has only appeared twice on television, ever, that I'm aware of. Mr. Arthur Schlesinger Jr., who was a historian, has called the Council on Foreign Relations a front organization for the heart of the American establishment in his book, 1,000 Days, page 128. Mr. David Halberstam, in his book called The Best and the Brightest, on page 6, called the Council on Foreign Relations the establishment's unofficial club. Newsweek magazine, September 6, 1971, page 74, referred to the Council on Foreign Relations leaders as the foreign policy establishment of the United States. Esquire magazine, an article, The American Establishment, May of 1962. It was by a Mr. Richard Rivera. Quote, "He viewed the Council on Foreign Relations as a sort of presidium for that part of the establishment that guides our destiny as a nation. End of quote. If the CFR guides our destiny as a nation, what destiny does it promote? What future does it have for you and me? I think that is a legitimate question. 5 times a year, the Council on Foreign Relations publishes a journal called Foreign Affairs. Those involved in foreign affairs read this publication religiously. It's from the pages of this particular magazine that our future foreign policy is made. Time magazine called Foreign Affairs the most influential periodical in print in the world. The Council on Foreign Relations even has a corporate program by which they indoctrinate businessmen all over the United States and the world in international relations and interdependence with economics with other nations. They have 38 cities in which they have what are called committees on foreign relations. That's in the United States. The Council on Foreign Relations has exercised a very decisive impact upon the United States policy, especially foreign policy, since the days of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It has achieved this primarily in 2 ways. The first is by directly supplying personnel for upper echelon government jobs. That way they make the policy decisions. Few Americans know how a president actually chooses his administrative officials. The majority probably trust that our officials that are elected will find the best people qualified for the job and to create security for our government. However, Pulitzer Prize winner Theodore White said that the Council on Foreign Relations, and I quote, roster of members has for a generation under Republican and Democratic administrations alike been the chief recruiting ground for the cabinet level officials in Washington. End of quote. And that was his book, The Making of a President, 1964, page 67. So here is an organization that now goes into the government of the United States unelected, and yet they make all policy decisions in the guidance of our nation. No wonder that no matter which party, Democrat or Republican, the president goes into office and nothing ever changes. We only become more socialized than ever before because it's not the president necessarily, but it's those advisors that guide him, that leads us into the new world government which they're looking for. The Christian Science Monitor once observed that, I quote, there is a constant flow of the Council on Foreign Relations members from private life to public service. Almost half of the council members have been invited to assume official government positions or to act as consultants at one time or another. End of quote. Their September 1st, 1961 issue. Mr. Joseph Kraft, in writing in Harper's Magazine in 1958, page 64, called the Council on Foreign Relations a school for statesmen. Mr. David Halberstam puts it this way, quote, they walk in one door as businessmen and come out the other door as statesman figures. End of quote. That was in the New York Magazine, September 20th, 1971, page 48. I think history speaks for itself. Through early 1988, 14 secretaries of state, 14 treasury secretaries, 11 defense secretaries, and hundreds of other federal department heads have been members of the Council on Foreign Relations. Every Secretary of State since 1949 has been a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. No wonder our foreign policy aids and abets the movement of international socialism for the overthrow of governments.